So I want to talk to you today about the rational mind. Now, there's something that's called confirmation bias that's been around since the 1970s as an idea. It's been tested and retested over and over for the last 40 some odd years. Confirmation bias basically means we have an idea, we have a view of the way things are, and we accept any information that reinforces that view, and we reject all the information that doesn't. And it doesn't matter how credible this information is or what the source of it is confirms what we believe, and so therefore we accept it. Now, we can see this in spades all over the world, not to mention in our own country here in the United States. Nobody really has asked the question until recently, where does this come from? Why does that happen? And there were two researchers named Mercier and Sperber, and they wrote a book called The Enigma of Reason. And here's what they posit: that the rational mind was developed from an evolutionary perspective, not to analyze data, not to understand information, but to win arguments. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why? Well, what they're saying is that in the early hunter-gatherer days, cooperation among the group was really critical. And cooperation across a broad spectrum is really what distinguishes us from other mammals. Now, there are mammals that cooperate in the hunt. There are mammals that cooperate in raising offspring. But in terms of a societal concept, human beings separate themselves from other mammals by their ability to cooperate. But as we know, even in these times, first of all, cooperation is difficult to set up and takes a lot of work to maintain in a group. There's a constant vigilance that is required to make sure that the group stays cohesive. So their theory is that human beings develop this ability to make an argument about why so-and-so shouldn't sit on their backside in the cave while everybody else is out on the hunt. Okay, so if we take that idea, then we have to say, well, wait a minute, human beings have progressed past just arguing with each other, and that's quite true. And how do they do it? Well, they do it in two ways. One is we develop methodologies. So we have, for example, the scientific method. What is that? Well, somebody in a laboratory somewhere does A, B, C, D, and E and gets result X, and they write a paper about it, and then somebody halfway around the world who doesn't have a dog in the fight about whether you get X out of doing that or not, does A, B, C, D, and E and gets X. Boom. Okay, now we have proved something, all right? And that result becomes part of the scientific lexicon going forward. That's one way that we get around this argumentative nature that we've developed. The other way we do it, and that they point out in this book quite brilliantly, is that when we're asked, for example, how something works, and their example is, how does a toilet work? Well, you push the little lever or push a button and the stuff goes away, and that's how it works. Except that's not how it works. And so when we ask somebody to specifically sit down and write out how it works, what happens? They develop humility in that moment because they don't know how it works. And I'll give you another example that's personal. I mean, there was a time when I was the CIO of a global advertising agency, and if I had to sit down and write out how it is that I can make this video and upload it to YouTube and you can see it and all the little steps involved in the technology that allows that to happen, forget it. I don't have a clue. And in that moment, I have reverence for the people who figured it out. Okay. So what's happening in that process is that we're using our imagination to try and understand what somebody else did. And in doing that, we get humility. And that humility, we could also say, is some kind of empathic connection to the creativity of the other person that did this. It was amazing, right? This is amazing that I can do this and you can watch it. In business, I would argue that no company was ever started with a spreadsheet. This doesn't happen. It comes from imagination. It comes from passion. It comes from a sense that, oh, this would be a really cool thing to do. Now, it is true. You got to have a spreadsheet pretty quickly if you want to stay in business. But the idea initially doesn't come from the spreadsheet. So what is it in our experience that allows us to make that connection to other human beings, to understand that their position or their experience or their view is completely different from ours, perhaps, and is pretty incredible and worthy of some kind of honoring of what that creativity was about? There's that, and then there's this experience of, I have this view, and I just got some information that says I'm right, and yes, I'm right. Now, if you reach a certain point in your life, you understand that being right is highly overrated. However, there's that reinforcement that goes on. What is that? Well, what we've discovered is that when you get that piece of information that says you're right, you get a little hit of dopamine. Feels good, right? It's an addiction, basically. This reinforcement of this idea that you have and this rejection of everything that doesn't support it. It's an addiction. What's the other experience? Well, the other experience is, oh, wow, there's a lot that I don't understand and I'm grateful for. Certainly, as it relates to toilets, I'm grateful for when I hit the button or push the lever that stuff goes away. And in that moment, that humility gives us an appreciation of our humanity. Two very different experiences, right? So why does one take preference over the other? Well, as I just mentioned, one's addictive. The other one is not addictive because it gives us a sense of the limitations of our intellect. And that's very useful, frankly. And what I do all day long, which I'm sure if you're watching this video you know, is I work with people's dreams. Well, dreams, first of all, by their very nature, don't, quote, make sense, right? So they're not particularly acceptable to the rational mind until we actually talk about them, until we actually work with them and we understand what they're trying to inform us about, which is the nature of who we are as human beings, not how to reinforce the argument that we've made about why we're right. So the rational mind is not an enemy. But someone once said to me, you know, the rational mind really is a gardening tool for the soul. And what that means is that once we understand that creative, imaginative sense of who we are, yeah, we need to act on it. And that requires us to sort of put together a plan. But the rational mind is not in charge of that. The rational mind is the implementer of that. And we've stood this on our head. We've got it upside down in our culture. We think that what we think is the most important thing. It's not. Our imagination is the most important thing. Our connection to each other as human beings is the most important thing. And what they discovered also in some of their work, these two researchers, is that you can take that and you can put it into the context of social science. And you can look at disagreements that we have in our culture about how we should operate as a culture. And as soon as we begin to try and understand the other person's position, and this is no news to anybody, all of a sudden our sureness about our position begins to dissipate. And another way of doing this literally is taking a bunch of people with disparate positions and putting them in a group and having somebody tell a dream, and then we all work the dream. Because what happens? There's an intimacy, there's a human intimacy that takes over, that is far more powerful than your rational mind. So to paraphrase Einstein, our genius is in our imagination, not our intellect. So that is what I wish for you. And I wish for you many dreams that will inform you of who you really are. And then we have this ability to play with this thing called our mind, which is fantastic, as long as it's always in the second position. Take care. Talk to you soon.